of clothing without separating it out and without doing all sorts of different things to it to make sure that we get all the same type of fibre together. So in some cases, financially, it's a huge burden, and environmentally, it's not always the best thing to do. To put some figures onto this, only about, in this country, 17% of our clothing is currently recycled. And globally, about 30 billion pounds of textile waste goes into landfill every year. So now I've depressed everybody with all those figures. What are we going to do about it? What can we do about it as an industry? Well, the industry is really starting to think now about how we can push forward, how we can do things differently. Now, obviously, in terms of production, we could make our factories cleaner. We've got access to wind turbines and solar panels and that sort of thing. So we could make the industry cleaner. But what we can also do is start to think about some of the innovations that are happening in the wider world and what we can do with them, how we can use them to impact our textiles. So I'm going to show you a few of those now. I could talk about this for the rest of my life, but I promise not to. I promise not to talk for too much longer. But this is just a little snapshot of what's going on in the industry. So the first thing that we need to tackle is waste, probably. And one of the things that has been really looked at within the fashion industry is 3D printing. So 3D printing is a new way of producing materials, and lots of people think of 3D printing as being almost like pieces of Lego and that sort of thing, little hard plastic objects. And the revolutions in the sort of materials that we can now 3D print have meant that we can now produce clothing. The lady with the prosthetic legs that you see on the screen there danced at the opening of the Paralympic Games in Brazil wearing a 3D printed dress. If you see that video of her dancing, you can see how fluid and beautiful that and how it moves with the body. So it's not a hard, clunky plastic piece of textile at all. It's a really beautiful, comfortable dress to wear. The lady in red that you see on the screen, her garments have been produced by a designer who only designs 3D printed clothing. And her vision for life is that if you go traveling anywhere, you never need to pack another item of clothing ever again. All you do is download your clothing onto a USB stick, travel to wherever you're going, and then print your wardrobe off when you get there. Now, that seems a bit out there, but actually, this cuts down massively on waste because we're only ever producing the garment. We're not producing any cut-offs, any bits and pieces. There's nothing there. Only the garment is being produced. So what this means is that in an ideal world, we could all go into a body scanner. Body scanners are very commonplace now. If you see things like Xboxes and you see the interactivity that you can get with avatars on an Xbox, it's very similar to body scanning technology that we use in the industry. So you could feasibly be body scanned, have an avatar that is you, your perfect measurements on the screen. You could use CAD software in the garment. It would be perfect on the screen. You could see how it fits, the areas of tension, the areas of looseness. You could make that garment perfect, design it in the colour that you wanted, and then print it out. And there's absolutely no waste. And that isn't as far-fetched as you might think, because the trainer on the bottom of the screen is actually in mass production now, and that's an Adidas trainer that is being 3D printed. So just on the subject of waste, Levi's have been looking at waste for quite a long time. They've made these classic jeans out of recycled polyester bottles. Now, obviously, recycled polyester bottles are not going to feel like cotton denim. So it's a bit of a blend, but it's an interesting idea that they're starting to use this waste as a new resource to make textile from. The trainers that you see on the screen are part of a project that Adidas are involved with called Parley for the Oceans. And that is taking fishing nets either from the sea that have been discarded or washed up on beaches. And they are shredding those down, respinning them into textiles, and then creating the trainers that you see on the screen. So that really is a great use of waste that maybe would just go into landfill. So sticking on the subject of, we generate quite a lot of food waste. So this is a huge industry that is untapped. Food waste in terms of seafood shells is massive. Now, seafood shells would normally biodegrade anyway, so it's not a huge problem in terms of landfill. But it's an interesting problem in terms of raw material, because we've got this untapped raw material there that's not being used. The polymer that is inside a shell is chitin, and it's one of the most abundant natural polymers that we have on the planet. We can crush these shells down, do a bit of jiggery pokery with some solvent and spin it into a fibre. Now, obviously, the solvent is going to have an environmental impact, but again, we're using a resource that is already there. So we're taking that powder and we're spinning it into a fibre. You will never guess in a million years what this fabric is called in this. Somebody obviously had a flash of inspiration. It's come from crab shells, so they've called it Crabion. So they deserve gold stars for innovative naming. And so Crabion yarn is taken off. It's being used on the catwalk, it's being used in things like school uniforms, but still its biggest application is in medical textiles. So while we're thinking about how fashion can be impacted, we can also start to branch out into other technical textile applications. So this type of application, type of source is being used in medical textiles for things like burn dressings and for dissolvable stitches. So staying on the subject of food, this is pineapple leather. So you may have heard of this. It's by a company called Pinatex, and they create leather from crushed up pineapples. So what they do is they take the byproducts of squashing pineapples for juice and that pulp that's left behind. They essentially squash it flat and make it into a leather. And you can see leather jackets, bags, shoes. There's been concept cars created with interiors made of Pinatex leather. So it's all very exciting. So why isn't everybody doing this? Well, there's a couple of problems with this. The pineapples themselves are farmed in the Philippines. If Pinatex didn't take that mashed up pineapple after it was juiced, that flesh itself can be used as biomass or biofuel. So it's not a problem in terms of waste, but it is a different use. However, these pineapple pulps are shipped from the Philippines to Europe. So there's a huge sort of carbon footprint there. And this is where they're reprocessed. If you can imagine, if you have a squashed up pineapple and you dry it out, it's not going to look an awful lot like leather. There's quite a lot of processing that needs to happen. And to make this pineapple durable, it's coated with plastic. So it kind of defeats the object. Now, Pinatex are very open and honest about this and know that this is something that they need to address. And what they're trying to say is actually, we can look at different ways of using stuff and all right, this process isn't perfect. It's just an interesting concept. But taking that one step further and looking at how we can create textiles from other foodstuffs, this is banana tex. So one of the things that is happening in the textile industry is a lot of mad scientists and textile technologists are looking at what we can do with the industry and how we can make it more sustainable. But we're not product designers. And this is maybe where we're falling down, that we're creating these new textiles that are not taking off. These guys are product designers, so they've gone at it from the other way and they've said, okay, let's make something really beautiful that people will want to buy and look at how we can produce it. So banana tex create really, really beautiful items, bags, luggage. They've started with clothing, but only just. So what they do is they look at banana trees. The banana trees are pruned. They take those stems, they chop them up and spin them into fibre, weave them into fabric, manufacture the fabric. What these guys do differently is they make sure that everything is done locally to the banana tree. So they're not shipping things for hundreds of miles, thousands of miles all across the globe. And they're not trying to reinvent the wheel. So they're using traditional spinning, weaving, dyeing processes, albeit making sure that they're more environmentally friendly and sustainable. What they do when they create their products is that they don't use anything that isn't biodegradable or completely compostable. And their vision is, when you have finished with one of their items, you could literally take it to the bottom of the banana tree, place it there, it would compost and enable another banana tree to grow. And I think that's a really lovely idea, thinking about this real circularity that we're taking from nature, but we're also giving back. So it's lovely way of thinking about these things. But if you ever look up banana text products, they're not overly cheap. So just a warning, if you're all rushing to buy a banana handbag, they're not cheap products at all. So sticking with the subject of food, these are mushrooms, obviously, but more specifically, mycelium is the root of the mushroom. And this has been found to be a fantastic biofabric. So it's already been used quite heavily as a replacement for cardboard packaging. So, you know, when you buy things and they're delivered to your house and they're all heavily packaged, mycelium is starting to make inroads into replacing that cardboard. It's completely compostable. It has a certain degree of water repellency, and it's reasonably durable while kept indoors. So these are quite exciting times. But what makes this particularly exciting and a particularly interesting thing to look at is that just recently in the fashion weeks that have just happened, Stella McCartney has showcased mushroom leather on the catwalk. She showcased it as a bag, but what she has also done, these didn't appear on the catwalk, are these garments here on the left that we'd all wear to knit down to the shops. But this McCartney creation from mushroom leather. And this is exciting because we know now then that when it starts to trickle down. So hopefully this will start to gather pace with the mass market. The mat that you can see in the middle of the screen is a mushroom leather mat made by Lululemon, who are a mainstream sportswear supplier. And again, Adidas have jumped on the bandwagon, and this is a Milo mushroom leather trainer, and it's a special edition. So they're sort of really building the hype around that. So that's mushroom leather. We can make vegetable leather in other ways. So this is bacterial cellulose. So this is the bacterial version of cotton plant fibre. If you have ever drank kombucha tea because you want the fantastic health benefits that apparently it gives you, this is how we make bacterial cellulose. So this is a tea with a starter culture. So it's just green tea and sugar. We brew the tea for about 3 weeks and this film forms on the surface. This film then can be taken, we can just rinse it under a tap and wash it, dry it out, and it becomes very leather-like. So it's a really easy thing. If you want to try growing it at home, it's really, really easy to do. The pioneer in this field, Suzanne Lee, showed that we could make garments out of it. It took up colour really well. We could print it, dye it, sew rib onto it, put zips into it, put buttons on it. Really exciting stuff. Why isn't everybody wearing it? Because it loves moisture. So even the fact that you're wearing it against the skin means it absorbs the perspiration from your skin. So obviously it needs some treatment. You can put beeswax on it, which makes it a bit more durable. But in Manchester on a rainy day, it's probably not going to be the best garment in the world to wear. So it still needs some work. I'm aware that I'm running a little bit short of time, so I'm nearly at the end. I want to reassure everybody. So this is a garment that's been made by Puma, and this is on the same theme of bacterial cellulose. And what they're saying is, why do we make garments to last forever if we don't want to keep them forever? So this concept is called designing to die. And basically what they're saying is, let's make garments that start to fall apart. Let's join the model of the modern world. So on Netflix, we don't buy DVDs anymore. We hire the film and pay for the experience. The same with Spotify and music. So why not use that with our clothing? So you don't buy that clothing to own forever. You know that you're just buying that experience for a limited amount of time. So it's a really interesting concept. I'm not sure that sportswear is its best application, but it's an interesting thing to look at. Just moving on then to algae and how we can use that for dyeing. As you can see on here, Alga Life is a company that's looking at how we use algae traditional processes that I started talking about at the beginning. And you can see here on the screen the massive impacts that it has on water consumption, chemicals, fertilizers, carbon emissions. It's a huge impact. So this is really one to watch. And I can see our clothing of the future really being dyed by these sorts of microbes. There are also microbes that are being modified so that they will eat away at fabrics that are in landfill. So that's a really exciting thing. But then just to sort of draw things to a close, this is a garment that was created in the States, and this garment has been coated with microbes, which sounds a little bit grim when you think about it, but considered that we're covered with hundreds of microbes, thousands of microbes, it's not really as bad as it sounds. So these microbes are on this garment. They are moisture sensitive. So when the body heats up and perspires, these microbes move and open the flaps in the garment. When the body cools down, they move again and close the flaps in the garment. So it's a completely reactive piece of clothing that we can wear, and it's completely natural microbes. So that's a really, really exciting thing in terms of performance clothing as well. So just to wrap up by saying, if you are really interested in any of this, Textiles 2030 is a movement that is looking globally at how we can impact as an industry on the climate targets that we all need to achieve. And the Textile Institute is a professional body that moderates the industry. So they're always worth taking a look at, because there's always all sorts of events on with them. But as you can see, there's quite a lot of mad things going on in the industry. And I think I'd just like to finish by saying, the only limits are our imagination. There are all sorts of things we can do with textiles, and that this really just is the tip of the iceberg. So that was a very, very quick run through. So thank you very much, everybody. And are there any questions, or are we doing questions at the end?
Yeah. First of all, that was brilliant, Jane. Thank you so much. Really interesting, and yeah, a bit mind-boggling, maybe, but more than interesting. But yeah, very, very, very interesting. So thank you so much. No we're going to have a few minutes for questions now, and they need to sort of perhaps go into the chat box. I mean, one that came to me, or a couple that came to me, were with these microbe and natural dyes. Would there be a great choice of colours, or would it just be like blues and greens and that's it?
Yeah, no, there is a great choice of colours, and it is a real sort of part of the industry that's starting to grow. So I had to really presentation down. So I did have some images of microbes and how they dye. But there is a huge range of colours. We're not limited to those colours that you would necessarily associate with the natural world, so those quite muted colours, because microbiology is such a new science, relatively speaking. We're constantly discovering different microbes that can do different things. We've done lots of work over at Manchester Met, looking at how we can make things glow in the dark, looking at squid genes and things like that. So there's all sorts of things that we can do. So we're not constrained, but I appreciate why people would think that way, because I think sometimes when you think about plant dyes and natural dyes, they are those quite sort of isolated, muted colours, but no, not at all.
Oh, that sounds quite exciting. A new variation of colour instead of, you know, salmon pink could really, really be salmon pink. Just, I don't think we've got many. Oh, we are starting to get some questions. Yeah, go on, Jill.
Sorry, I think people were just so glued to the presentation, Jane, that they didn't have time to type in. We have got we've got a question here. I think it's from Tash. The design to dye garment by Puma. How long were they expecting it to last?
Well, so this is an interesting thing, because this is a concept rather than garments that are ready for mass production. So some of the things that they have put out as marketing material, you see people running marathons in these garments, multiple marathons, and they last and last and last, and then you start to see them degrade. I happen to know that with the current technology that just couldn't happen, because they would start to degrade almost immediately if you were running a marathon. Certainly if I was, because I'd get very, very quickly, but the perspiration from your body would start to degrade that. One of the things that they have done is, it's interesting to see how those garments behave from a sportswear point of view, but they're really targeting very high-end garments, so things like ball gowns and things like that. So maybe you would wear them a limited number of times for a relatively short amount of time, and therefore they would probably last longer. But I think if you were wearing a piece of sportswear, you'd probably wear it a couple of times and then you'd start to see it disappear.
Yeah. Can I ask a question? It goes right back to the beginning of your presentation, Jane, really.
Yeah.
Have there been any successful legal actions taken by communities to get compensation for like the pollution that happens to their waters? Do you know of anything that communities have been able to do?
I don't know about legal action. I know that communities have sort of taken action in that they've maybe, you know, a bit like a picket line and that sort of thing on factories. I think we're very lucky in this country that it happens less and less. But it's interesting to see that even in this country and in Northern Ireland, that you would be really shocked at how lax the rules are on what you can put into the waterways. So one of the things that I don't think I mentioned this, but one of the things I work with is bacterial cellulose, and look at it as a filter rather than a fashion fabric. Look at it as a technical textile. And I've done some work with the water industry, and it really is quite terrifying the amount that you're allowed to put out into the rivers if nobody can see it. So if it's not brightly coloured, you can put it out there. And as long as it doesn't have a load of fish floating on the surface and people can't see it, it's really scary, really scary. But to go back to your question, I'm not aware of legal action. I am aware of demonstrations, but I'm not aware of legal action. It could be.
Right.
But I don't know.
Oh, gosh, thank you. Got a couple of questions popped up here, Jane. One from Helen. What about bamboo? Because obviously bamboo is a fabric that quite recently we've all been told is sustainable, but it's not one you mentioned. So no, what about bamboo? How
long's a piece of string? I mean, there's loads and loads. So yeah, bamboo's one. And there was a trend around milk fibre. So looking at how we use sort of curds and whey, I guess, and spinning milk fibre, there's coffee fibre, there's all sorts of things. Basically, if you can crush it up and spin it into a fibre, then you can do something with it. The issues with it are bamboo is a very similar thing to something called lyocell or tencel, if you've heard of that, and that's made from wood pulp. So basically all the byproducts of the wood industry and all the bits of wood that you can't do anything with and all sawdust and all that, you can spin that into fibre, and it's done. And it's been done for years and years. The issues used to be with it that you need some quite harsh solvents and chemicals to get it into anything that's usable. So the focus now is making those solvents more environmentally friendly. So that'll be the same thing with bamboo, that yes, you can do it. We just need to think about how we make it into a fabric that we recognise as a fabric, because I think we're quite spoiled as a society as well. We want all these lovely soft clothes against our skin, and sometimes the things that we're used to are not quite as easy to replace as we think they might be. So yeah, there's lots of stuff out there. Yeah, I didn't mention bamboo, but I could have talked for a week about everything.
Yeah, there's a question. There's a sort of question here about Jamie Redknapp. Gwenda's nephew bought a Parker jacket that he'd bought from ex-footballer Jamie Redknapp, made entirely from plastic bottles, and it's the brand was Sandbanks. Do you know of that brand?
No, I don't know of that brand, but I think the interesting thing is the cost. So the industry is quite divided about this. So there are parts of the industry that think if we are using waste, that's almost like a free resource, because somebody's just going to throw that away. So it's almost like lost its value. So you're getting free raw material. So therefore, should you be charging a premium for this? And parts of the industry say no. The industry say, but we've got to develop new technology for this new raw material. So it should have a price premium. So that's around raw material. I think one of the interesting things is it's a Jamie Redknapp labelled garment. It's going to have a price premium on it because of that name. But actually, when you think about what the fabric is itself, it's probably much cheaper than the design and the brand make it out to be. It's like with anything, you know, when you buy in or couture or something that's from a very high-end brand, it doesn't necessarily translate that the fabric's any better. You might be paying a little bit more for the construction, but you're probably paying more for the design and the label that's on there. So it's an interesting thing with recycled polyester and what's going on in the industry.
Gwenda says the approximate cost of the jacket was £800, Jane.
I know, that's huge. Absolutely
ridiculous.
Huge.
Ridiculous, isn't it?
I was on a conference last year and it descended very quickly into a huge row. Somebody from the industry was saying, I don't know how people can justify this cost, because I know as a manufacturer, it doesn't cost me any more. In fact, it costs me less. And he was sort of, oh, no, don't tell anybody that. Oh, my God, don't tell anyone. But he was very vocal saying it's wrong. It's wrong that we should have these price premiums.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Jane. We've got a question here from Alison. Is 2030 a realistic timescale to develop some of these ideas to create more sustainable textiles on a large commercial scale?
I think for some of them, yes. So I think things like mushroom leather is already making great inroads. There's been a lot of research around that. I think some things that we don't even think about just yet will probably make great leaps and bounds. I think where the real difference is going to come in the textile industry is the processing and, you know, how we use energy and how we're more efficient. So things like the image that I showed you about the red dye going into the river, if we could recycle that water, we could extract that dye, extract those heavy metals and pump out clean water. That's already a huge environmental impact and an energy saving, because if we're taking the dye out and we're taking the heat out of the water and we're taking the chemicals out and we can reuse those, that's massive, because we're not pumping it into the environment and we're being able to use it again. So I think the real wins around sustainability in the industry are going to come around processing rather than necessarily brand new fabrics. I think they will play a part, but I don't think that's where the major impact is going to be. 2030, we see huge changes in the textile industry all the time. So I think, to answer the question, for some of the things, yes, it's realistic. For others, no, but I think if it doesn't happen in 10 years, 9 years, then it's just not going to happen at all. It's going to be one of those niche things that people look at. And then I can just see this question here about greenwashing, and it's horrendous. There's some real terrible marketing going on. I was talking to some of the students today about greenwashing. You are led to believe, and I won't mention them because I know I'm being recorded, but some brands, some high street brands, will have you believe that everything in their store is completely sustainable, whatever your understanding of sustainability is. But actually, it's probably just the garment in the window that you're looking at. It's the only one garment that is from that sustainable, environmentally friendly source, and everything else is fast fashion. So yeah, there is. And you're right, terminology needs to be clarified, because it's a bit like the food industry. When you say something's farm fresh, what does that mean? Something's free range, what does that actually mean? And I think there does need to be a tightening up in the labelling. That's absolutely right.
I think we're going to have to look to the time here. I think we could go on discussing these and we might be able to do so a bit more at the end. Okay. But we want to hear what Kate's got to say as well. So I think we should move on now. And I will introduce Kate to everyone. Now, Kate, with help and support from her husband and a daughter, runs Wiseheart Wild in the centre of New Mills. I'm sure you've seen it, just, you know, at the top of the roundabout, or right on the roundabout as you're coming into New Mills. It's a weaving studio, an artist cooperative, and it sells absolutely lovely yarns and natural fibres. Kate advocates shopping locally and sourcing materials locally, and she's going to talk to us about her community linen project, which she started earlier this year, and it sort of leads on from and complements another project she's worked on, which is about using and spinning local wool that she gets from small herds locally, and then has it all processed fairly locally as well in Bridlington, where I'm not sure where it is, but it's local, and that is called Northern Alchemy, which I think is a brilliant way of describing all of that. So hand over to you, Kate, to tell us all about this.
Right, hello everybody, nice to see you all, and amazing talk from Jane there. I'm thinking about what I can grow in order to create next, I think. I'm going to take you back rather than forward. I'm going to take you back to 8000 BC, when a fibre has been found. It was found in the tombs that wrapped the pharaohs on their final journey, and that fibre was linen. Linen is, in fact, the fibre that was created by the ancient Egyptians still cannot be reproduced by the hand or machine. It was so fine and superb. However, linen is a fabric that's obviously, it's created from the flax plant. It's strong, it's absorbent, it dries faster than cotton. And so those factors means it's a good fibre for both outerwear, underwear, and household textiles. If we have the next slide, please. I sound like Chris Whitty, I'm very sorry. So what are the pros of linen? Well, it's natural and hypoallergenic. It's biodegradable, and like Jane said, as long as it's in its natural state. Looking at dyed or bleached linen, you then have all the problems that are associated with that. It's strong, it's breathable, and it's UV resistant and very absorbent. All of those features are within that textile. So it can actually absorb up to 20% of its weight in water without forming any form of bacteria, so we don't smell. All right, and it's warm in the winter and cool in the summer, so that's another good thing. So next slide, please. The cons is prone to wrinkling, and there's only one solution to that. You learn to use an iron, or you learn to live with it. It's quite simple. But actually, the wrinkling and how the fibre it benefits, shall we say, from that look too. When commercially dyed or bleached, it can lose its biodegradability, which is what Jane was talking about earlier, that those things can have an effect. And some commercial companies use pesticides, insecticide to make it grow more quickly. And hopefully you'll see why really those two can be irrelevant to, we don't need those to have a nice fabric. Next slide. So, is linen a sustainable crop? As a crop, flax is extremely sustainable. It doesn't require lots of water in comparison to cotton, and it can thrive in very harsh conditions. So even places where you can't grow food, you can grow flax. It doesn't need pesticides or any insecticide to grow, and can be, if harvested properly, a total regenerative crop, so very good for the soil. However, the processing of flax, as you'll see in a few minutes, is very labour intensive, and at the present time it can't be done by us on any form of commercial level in this country, because all of the processing is now happening abroad. And to look at that, a slight example, if anybody's got a calculator there, start pinging in the numbers. An example of possible air miles on just a linen shirt bought in Manchester, all right? Linen's grown in Northern Europe mainly. It is also grown in Canada and sort of other places, but mainly Northern Europe. So France, Belgium, those sort of places. Say our flax for our linen was grown in France. It's then shipped by air to Shanghai for processing. So that's your first thing. It's about 5,500 miles. If it's processed there, spun, and then probably sent 200 miles down the road to be woven into fabric. So there's another 200 miles. Then another 50 miles down another road in a similar area to be dyed. So there you've got your dyed fabric created, then has to be made up into the shirt. So it's sent to Bangladesh. So that's another 4,300 miles. All right. It's then sent by long haul from Bangladesh to the UK. So that's another 10,000 miles. All right, shipping miles, but there's still miles onto that. It arrives at Southern Port and driven up to Manchester. So let's add another 288 miles on it. And if anybody's been doing the numbers, that should give you about 20,338 miles on one linen shirt. Now, it's a wonderful natural fabric, and we love linen, but I think that should make us think we have to learn to shop maybe more locally, look for anything that's processed nearer, and look at how we can enable that, if you like. Hence the next slide. Wild Flax and Heart. It was really inspired by the home farm project we did in New Mills, where people started growing wheat to see if we could, grow our own bread. And we at Wiseheart Wild, we decided to see if we could work out a plant-based fibre that was sustainable and would work alongside our wool, of which we're very proud. So we first of all, we actually looked at nettle fibre. That was quite fascinating, but it was not going to prove easy to process a fine fibre in order to, sort of hand weave. So the next thing was, well, flax. It seemed a natural solution. So we then thought, well, there's Toby giving out little packets of seed for bread. Let's give out little packets of seed for fabric and see what happens. New Mills being New Mills, we managed to get rid of 50 little packets of seed. Each packet of seed had the capability of growing a metre square flax. So basically, we then sat back for 100 days, twiddled our thumb, opened a Facebook page, allowed people to post photographs of their wonderful growing flax and the beautiful flowers and all this sort of thing. And then we asked them to bring it back to us when it had got to us at the correct stage of growth. So we actually started to receive the flax back in June. In fact, Sue Cooper was the first person to bring us a stook of flax, which was wonderful. We were sort of like then twiddling our thumbs, thinking we've got to know how to process this properly, because we can't just do it from YouTube. It doesn't happen. All right. So we've set about. We're still collecting. It's still got a few more people who said, please don't do anything until I send you ours. So, we are in October, June to October. It's fine. Flax is really, really resilient to this. It just sits there being dried until we do something with it. So the next stage in this is going to be over the next 3 months, basically. Next slide, please, Jane. So it's all been planted. It's germinated. It looks great. It's literally, people were growing it in pots like this or in their allotments or all over the place. And that's been great. It's worked. Next slide. We obviously harvest it, but if you notice, we are harvesting it with the roots. Now, this is the first slight problem. When it's where it's grown in Belgium, it's harvested by pulling. Now they've got a special machine to do it. We don't. We've got our hands, so which actually leaves the roots in the soil, which is a really positive thing because flax grows at up to 5 centimeters a day. It sequesters quite a lot of carbon if you leave the roots in the soil. Obviously, if you take it out, that breaks that cycle, if you like. But as it grows, it also is putting things back, nutrients back into the soil. So it's a really good crop for the soil in that sort of way. Next slide, please. After harvesting, next slide, Jane, please. Right, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to ripple or hackle the grown flax. You can see these lovely seed pods. They're so pretty. And what we do basically is we're going to be taking it through iron nails to remove the seed heads, and we'll do this over a sheet so we can collect the seeds, hopefully to put back into the mix for next year as well. So, you know, try not to waste anything. Next slide. The next process is retting. Now, retting is what basically we wet the stalks, which break, they're left in the water, and the bacteria breaks down the hard woody bit and releases the fibre. Now, there's two types of retting. One is pond retting, and the other is dew retting. Pond retting has always been a problem, because what happens is, because of all that bacterial movement, it can cause waterways to stagnate, and you've got problems then for drinking water for animals, etc., etc. So we will actually be doing a version of pond retting, but it'll be done in a trough, and then that water is going to be the water we get from it is then diluted by 50 to 1 to actually get grey water that we can use on the garden. Right. Better than that is a thing called dew retting, which after harvest, and we couldn't do it this time because we knew the harvest would be quite long, and we get some of it and then we not get some of it and all this sort of thing. When you do it as one crop, you pull it up and then you leave it on the field, and the dew and the moisture do the same work, but the microbes go back into the soil. So dew retting is much better than pond retting. Next slide, please. Next thing we're going to do is, obviously we've loosened up all the woody bits of the stalk. We're going to break them, and literally it's a big machine that you well, it's a hand machine thing, but basically you just hit it and break it. And scutching is when you basically scrape away all the woody fibres. Now, the woody fibres can be used. They can be used to make paper and all sorts of things like that. So again, it's a good crop in that respect. You can use every little bit of it. Next slide, please. Next process is dyeing. Now, it's intrigued me with what Jane was saying, because basically, and I'm not going to say exactly the same thing again, but yes, she's right. Dyeing is it is a minefield done on a commercial basis. It is also not always the thing to think it's natural dye, therefore it's better, because as Jane points out, a lot of the modifiers that are used with dyers are heavy metals, and therefore you've got to know where you can get rid of those. And we have you know, yes, you maybe have, somebody may have a pot which they gradually fill up, but that pot has got to go somewhere eventually. So sometimes some of the chemical dyes used on a small basis, what they leave behind is either citric acid or water. They're actually better than the natural dyes. I will take issue with one thing Jane said. Natural dyes, it's not just greens and browns. You can get a real rainbow of colours, but again, it is what you use with it that produce that. The only thing that you colour that you can't get in the plant world truly is red. And then you've got issues of using cochineal, which, you know, has got all sorts of little issues attached to it. So they're also can be quite difficult to work with. So there are things that, you know, you think, well, okay, they're good, but they're bad, and it's like anything else. But it's being conscious about what you do. So when you use those dyes, you know what the waste is, you know how you're going to dispose of that. And on a smaller scale, you can do that, because, you know, there's just me and a Hannah doing the dyeing or whatever. We know what's coming out, we can test that, we can make sure it's right to go back into the water system, or it has to be disposed of responsibly in another way. So, you know, on a small scale, the dyeing, we will have some fun in the new year, and we'll offer people a chance to come and try dyeing with woad. All right, right. Thank you, Jane. Yes, I agree. Next bit is spinning. Well, anybody that's ever seen our shop will know that spinning, I was a spinner before I was a weaver. However, I was a spinner of wool, not a spinner of linen. And spinning linen and spinning wool are two completely different things. And I'm lucky enough to have a friend who lives in Yorkshire, who is a master spinner, who is taking me in hand before we spin New Mills linen. And beside me, actually, just about here, you can see it wriggling around. This is my little linen wheel with a distaff, which will be used for spinning the New Mills linen. It's more time consuming. You need to keep your fingers wet when you're spinning. But the nice thing about it, because we're going to be weaving it, hand weaving it, I only need to spin a single. I don't need to do anything about playing with it, and so that's great. So that's the next stage. And next slide, please. So finally, we're back with Millicent. Now, Millicent is my loom that was built in 1861. Funny enough, she was actually built for a lady that taught at what became the Royal School of Arts in London. It was before then, and she taught weaving. And she liked to weave linen and silk together. And so the loom itself is used to those fibres. It has two back beams. So because linen and silk stretch at different rates, you can put them on different back beams so it stretches nicely together. She will be what we use to weave the New Mills fabric. And I say fabric because it does depend how much we make from your growth. I have no idea what how much a stalk of linen contains. I have no idea when we finish it how much we will have. So what I'm going to do is create a fabric which is quite old, and it's called Linsey Woolsey. And basically it has a woolen warp and a linen weft. So we're going to use the Northern Alchemy wool as the weft and our homegrown linen as the weft, sorry, and the wool as the warp, apologise. And hopefully we will get a little bit more fabric to give back to the growers, because this is what we're going to do. We're not keeping it for ourselves. It goes back to the people that grew it this time. Next slide, please. So what next? Possible timeline, as you can see, we could in April 2022 plant more seed. All right, then we can harvest and duret it. If we can harvest it together, it'll be duretted. We can process it over winter, and we can dye and weave it in March, and in April we could do a cycle like that. That is quite possible. However, next slide, please. We do have problems. We have problems in climatic change for a start, which has already started to affect perhaps when we should be sowing our seed. It might be much better planting it over winter so that we can duret it in the spring when we get our heaviest dews. So again, that we may find that a better way of doing it. Flax actually responds well to growing in harsh environments and can be a truly regenerative crop if the stems are pulled, leaving the roots in the soil. I did come up with one quite interesting fact that in Belgium, where they grow flax, there is no such thing, by the way, as pure Irish linen anymore. It doesn't exist because it all starts and is processed in Belgium and is finished in Ireland at the moment. And I'll come to the Irish connection in a minute, but it's commercially grown there, and apparently their crop can sequester up to 250,000 tons of CO2. That's the equivalent apparently to driving a small car around the earth 62,000 times. It only requires 600 millimeters of water over 100 days of growth, which is in most places rain and dew. So you don't need to add anything to it. And so, you know, it is, as a future crop, I can see it as being a positive, have a positive effect. The issue of bleaching and dyeing is already being looked at in the industry, and I think hopefully will be looked at even more and perhaps reassessed, and maybe looking at dyeing in smaller, you know, in smaller places rather than in huge factories. I don't know. I'd like to see flax growing in England like it did right up to 1954. Don't know what happened in 1954, but after that, you couldn't find it anywhere. Northamptonshire was a fantastic place for growing linen, growing flax. In fact, all the Irish linen the flax was often grown in Northamptonshire and then taken over to Ireland. So, you know, we have the possibilities. I'd like to see investment in scutching mills in this country. And I'd like to be able to answer my Irish weaving friends. He's got a mill, and his question mainly is, why do people put lots and lots of investment into prehistoric rock? I think he was referring to a certain causeway in Ireland, when they don't put a penny into the industry that Ireland was famous for. Just a question, you know, but I'd like to be able to answer that in a positive way and say, actually, the investment is there. But it is going to take local communities to invest locally. It's going to take governments to take a risk on an old idea that is actually a new idea in a funny sort of way. So if we make locally just one linen shirt, just think what we can do on a national scale. You might have noticed actually on social media that Patrick Grant has been involved in a slightly larger project in Blackburn. They've been again looking at growing flax, producing. I think the idea is to produce a pair of jeans that has been completely made here, and looking at the viability of Flax's project. However, I spent about half an hour the other day speaking to Patrick Grant on the phone, and just basically said the same thing. Where do you go from here? And he said, well, until we get the processing done in this country, and again, it's all about processing, then there is no movement. It's not a viable crop, which is quite interesting that they've come to the similar conclusion that I have. I mean, from my point of view, at the moment, the cost of the linen that I'm going to be giving back was, I think the seed must have been about £30. The tuition, so maybe add another 100 on that, that I put in, you know, personally put into it, because I want to see what happens. So if you upscale that a little, you've got to think of how you're going to fund it, because we can't keep, although the people in new mills are wonderful, you can't keep saying to people, can you do this for me? Can you do that for me? Can you do, and I'm not going to give you anything back. You just do it for me, because it don't quite work like that. So I think to look to the future and to keep it as a regenerative part of new mills, you have to look at a business plan that goes alongside it, which, you know, may not be everybody's cup of tea, but at the end of the day, it's got to make sense in this old world of ours. So finally, what I'd like to say, I'd offer the chat. I am offering anybody that wants to the chance to grow it along with me next year, but there'll be slightly more conditions on when you grow it and how you grow it. Apart from that, that's it. That's our linen project.
That is brilliant, Kate. Thank you. It's made me feel all tingly that we can, you know, something so exciting is happening here in New Mills, and that we can all contribute to it. I think that is really wonderful. And I think it's really interesting as well, you know, the business side of it that you're saying needs to be looked at, needs to be addressed. And how do we do that still being local and, you know, positive and caring? So, yeah, really interesting. I love the kind of localness of it. Thank you ever so much, Kate. That was
You're very welcome.
just really brilliant information. Right. So, questions.
In the chat. Again, I think everyone's been kind of like glued to the talk and thinking things through. Sue Cooper has said already, Kate, she'll be happy to put some in over this winter. So you've got Sue there.
Thank you. Well, that's great.
Kate, I've got a question. Have you heard of the fibre shed movement?
This is is the answer to that question. I've known Justine for a long time. We talked about linen and production of linen for a long time. Unfortunately, at the moment, the fibre shed movement in England hasn't thought about that England's actually small. So they have a 25-mile radius around them. If you're not in that 25-mile radius, you can't be part of the group. Now, if they made it 250 miles, it includes the whole of England. And it does create problems, because if you're producing wool, and I want, I'm taking the next lot of wool up from New Mills up to Bridlington, the nearest mill for me to do a small scale spin is Bridlington. So if I had if I had to do it within 25 miles, I couldn't do it. So it's a brilliant movement. I mean, if you've read the original book from, it is absolutely fascinating, and I think there's a lot more work, but it has to again remember the locality it's dealing with. So although Justin and I have been friends for years, we can't at New Mills be part of the Northwest Fibre Shed because we're just outside the boundaries.
That's crazy.
It's how it is. It's how it is at the moment.
At the moment, things might change.
You have to say that at the moment. Yeah.
Yeah. What else have we got? So Gwenda's saying thank you. She's heard about the project. Thank you for padding it out with so much detail. So that was Gwenda. I'm sure people have got questions, but just not had time to type them in. So.
Well, everybody knows where I am. If they want to come into the studio, I'm always there. So, people want to ask questions, then that's fine.
Are you growing your own woad?
We're going to, yes. We've got.
Yes.
So that is the next thing. We are gradually getting together a small dye garden, which we will hopefully open up a little bit to growing like the flax, so that people can actually sort of grow a pot of woad as well. But there's lots of things that we have to sort of put in place alongside that as well. I have to make a living at what I do normally, so it's sort of balancing everything. But yes, we will.
Somebody's suggesting woad as body decoration. Who's that? Sue?
Yeah, well, she must be Welsh.
Let's honour Boudica.
I think we should. That would be next.
And paint ourselves blue.
That could be International Women's Day 2023, Sue.
Yeah. So, what is it they used to say? Ancient Britons never hit on anything as good as woad to sit on.
Oh.
So there we go. Yeah. But yes, woad is a lovely body decoration. Yeah. But we also have to be careful how we grow things and how we look at the environment too. So I'm cautious about
yeah. Tash is up for hand smashing and wetting and all the rest of it. So
great. Okay. Well, yeah. What we want to do, what Annie is hoping to do, is in the spring to actually do an indigo pot, so we can do some woad dyeing, and we can do some shibori dyeing, and we can just have a bit of fun around the blue stuff, basically. And I mean, it's magic because it's green and then it's blue and it's wonderful. So yeah, so that will happen, but in the spring. So